Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the program on extremism to talk about a very important extremism update as it relates to the June 1st, 2025 attack on innocent civilians who were merely marching in support of the release of the Israeli hostages when Mohammed Sabri Soliman conducted an attack using Molotov cocktails. We learned late yesterday that 82-year-old Karen Diamond succumbed to her wounds as a result of that attack, which is such a tragedy. And so, with us today to talk about details on this attack and about the attacker is Phil Niedringhaus, a regional director with the Secure Community Network. Phil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely a pleasure.
What can you tell us about that day?
Well, as you said, this attack happened back on June 1st of this year when a group of about 29 people were doing their weekly march in support of the hostages being held during the Israeli Palestinian conflict in Gaza. Um, During that, at the beginning of that peaceful march, Solomon, who is an Egyptian national illegally in the United States, attacked them with Molotov cocktails, um, badly burning 13 people. And Karen Diamond, 82-year-old from Boulder, Colorado, succumbed to her wounds on the 25th of this month and passed away. So a tragic event made more tragic by a death now. So now it's a homicide.
And can you do you know like the details on the types of how he made the Molotov cocktails and we've heard the flamethrower was used. Do you know any of those details?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, I do. So um, he admitted to agents when interviewed after the event that he had been planning this attack for a year. He did online research targeting this group specifically in marching in Boulder. He was living in Colorado Springs, which is about 80 miles away, a little over 80 miles away from Boulder. Boulder was kind of with the University of Colorado there, was kind of the epicenter of anti Israel, pro Palestine um, marches and activities. Um, he targeted this group, and as they gathered for their march, um, he disguised himself as a gardener. He had on a blaze orange vest, was pulling a gardener's wagon with Molotov cocktails underneath, and he had plants on top of it to disguise it. And then he had a backpack sprayer, like you might use, see a gardener use to spray weed killer or herbicide in an area, but he had gasoline in it. When he threw one of his first Molotov cocktails, he actually lit himself on fire. So the video footage and photographs you see at the event where he's shirtless, that's because he pulled his vest and shirt off because he was on fire. But 13 of the victims received burn wounds. And he was taken into custody by the Boulder police about 4 minutes after the first 911 calls, which were made by members of the group.
Okay, so that's a very interesting and it's a lot of information. So let me kind of break this down. So you said he's been targeting this group or planning this attack for a year. Was he conducting surveillance and doing, reconnaissance in preparation for this attack?
We imagine that he did. I don't have all of those details, but he told agents that he had been doing online research and had specifically targeted this group and again drove the 80 plus miles from Colorado Springs to Boulder to target this march that morning. And again, as far as planning and preparation, he decided to disguise himself as a gardener. He was off as the group gathered in on the Pearl Street Mall, right in front of the courthouse, the historic courthouse in Boulder. He was off to the side in a grass area around some shrubbery, again posing as a gardener, and then he made his attack from there.
So what do we know about his motivation?
Well, he he told agents when interviewed that he considered anyone who supported Israel a Zionist and that all Zionists must die. Um, he yelled "Free Palestine" and "Death to Zionists" during the attack. So clearly, his motivation was ideologically based on anti-Israel, which is anti-Semitism, anti-Jew, and in support of the conflict in Gaza.
Do we know, and I think he's Egyptian. Do we know the facts and circumstances surrounding his migration here, and his asylum request?
He came on, my understanding is he came on a tourist visa from Egypt, and that his family was with him living in Colorado Springs. He had a daughter, I believe, that was attending University of Colorado in Boulder. That was probably how he became familiar with the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protests in that community. And he had overstayed his visa, so was basically living in the United States illegally.
Okay. And we heard something about and I'm not sure if it's accurate, that he had actually filed an asylum claim that if he were to return to Egypt, he would be subject to persecution and torture. Do you have any facts surrounding that?
I do not.
Okay. Well, interestingly, I'd like to hit a couple more points, but let's go back to kind of describe for the audience your background, because I want to take that into context when you then tell us, kind of like the lessons learned, some security issues, given your current role now. So tell us about your background and then what your current role entails, and then we'll move on to lessons learned from this event, if there are any.
Well, like you, I spent my career in the FBI. I spent 29 years with the FBI, primarily working violent crime matters. But I spent 25 of those 29 years in the FBI's undercover covert operations world. I did significant domestic terrorism undercover back in the late 90s and early 2000s, where I was working white supremacist groups, did long-term undercover in the white supremacist world. And as my bureau career ended, I got on with Secure Community Network, initially as the regional security advisor for Colorado. And now I hold a regional director role where I'm responsible for the Jewish security programs in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, North and South Dakota, and Minnesota. So we primarily provide safety and security to Jewish organizations and nonprofits, but then we also do a lot of work in the interfaith community, as well as work for other targeted groups. So, one of the, I think, interesting things is the Jewish community is kind of attacked by the lunatic fringe on both the right and the left. I think that the average Jewish person would say the threat is a neo-Nazi white supremacist, but now, especially in the last couple of years, the radical left is as much of a threat, if not more, right now, and the anti-Israel feelings across the country, with the conflict with Palestine and Gaza, has really ramped up the threat from Islamic extremists and those sympathetic to those anti-Israel causes as a real threat to the Jewish community.
And with the Secure Community Network, you all monitor for the threats to the community, and then not just within the community, but across the country. And I just, from my perspective, I'm seeing, an increase in violent acts. Like we've seen the rhetoric since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack against Israel. We've seen the anti-Semitic rhetoric, spread far and wide. But it seems to me that we're seeing an uptick in violence on which they're basing that rhetoric. It's kind of like their platform. Is that what you're seeing, monitoring the threats to the community?
Absolutely. The threats to the Jewish community, and I would say the community of faith in the United States, has never been higher. And it's a big part of what we do in the safety and security programs for faith-based organizations is emphasize the importance of safety and security, and the days of um, having the doors unlocked, on whether it's a synagogue or a church, are kind of over. I grew up a Lutheran preacher's kid in rural South Dakota, and the days of the doors being unlocked and open all the time are kind of over. And now we try to find that balance between open and welcoming and safe and secure. Um, we want people to feel that they can come to worship wherever they choose to come to worship, but we also want people to exercise situational awareness and physical security in their synagogues or churches, so that tragic events, whether it's a mass shooting or an attack like this, people know how to react when it happens, and we do everything we can to prevent them.
It's a very interesting, dynamic right now because, in our country, we love our constitutional rights. We love our free speech. We love our, freedom of association. And it just seems that, if you're talking about protecting a community, it's a balance, right? Because you want people to be able to openly express their opposition to terrorists holding hostages, or frankly, openly express any feelings that they have without feeling like they could be a target of violence. But how do you go about advising groups like this that are doing activities that are out in the open in the public on a routine basis, right? There's a schedule, knowing that that makes them a more a target that is more easy to track. Like, how do you balance that, promoting the ability to be free in this country, but then also be secure?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It really is a balancing act, and it's finding that balance. And now more than ever, event planning is super important. If you're having an event, we want people to think about safety and security in advance. This same group, that Run for Your Lives group that was attacked in Boulder, has a very active group in Denver. And early on, we had the Denver Police Department providing them um, law enforcement overwatch during their marches. And when, like everywhere, police resources get stretched thin, they hired a private security company to have armed security guards with them. So often that presence, that law enforcement or security presence, is enough of a deterrent to make those groups safe. So we want to make sure that groups think about those things in advance, and at the very least, communicate with their local law enforcement that this is our group, this is where we're going to be, this is the time frame we're going to do it. To even if we don't have dedicated officers for it, if there's high visibility patrols in the area, so they know that those groups are functioning. And one of the biggest things we do is provide safety and security training, so situational awareness training, so people are aware of what threats can look like, if there's somebody lurking around, that it may be a threat, and most importantly, how to personally react if an attack happens, how to get away from it. The run, hide, and fight concept is so important for people to understand, not just when we're in a synagogue or a church, but when we're at a restaurant or at an event like this or at a movie theater. I was at the Aurora Theater shooting shortly after it happened, and who would have thought that a gunman would come into a movie theater and start shooting people? People have to know how to react, whether it's in a grocery store or a restaurant or a movie theater, when a tragedy happens.
Absolutely. And it's a very sad state that we're in, given that we have to have those concerns and that awareness. But, one final thing, I see that we're about out of time, but I think it also goes back to even before an attack happens, it's the situational awareness. It is understanding that if something doesn't look right, or someone is out of place, or you repeatedly see the same person at your weekly event, you know, take that into account. See something, say something. Don't just ignore things that cause you concern. Like, listen to that inner voice, right? Pay
Yep.
attention to
We
it.
all have that inner voice. We all have the natural ability, whether it's the hair standing up in the back of your neck or the weird feeling in your stomach, but we need to recognize that and act upon it before it's too late. And as a parent, I tell my kids, if something doesn't look right, leave. You just got to get out of there.
Thank you so much for your insight on this, Phil. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
All have a great day.